YouTube, Chrisiosity here, back again to talk about the movie Rocky, a movie I highly recommend for any leftist film buff, even if that wasn't the original target audience. You should probably watch the first video in this series if you haven't, otherwise this may not make a lot of sense. And I would like to take this time to thank AnarchoPack again for all of her help, as I probably wouldn't have made this series without her. In this episode, the YouTuber Garrett, who I'm sure you remember from his previous channel, has been kind enough to join me, and I'm really excited about that. So cool, let's get into it. When we left Rocky, he had lost his locker and gotten nowhere with Adrian. So now he heads to the Lucky 7 Tavern, helping out a random drunk on the way, because we need to be reminded as often as possible that deep down he's a good guy. Anyway, he's there to meet his friend Polly, who is also Adrian's sister.
Hey there, Lefty.
I'll be back in ready.
You got a friend for you.
Oh, Rock.
How you doing?
Well, it's rumored.
You see Polly?
Yeah, he's in the steam room.
Yeah.
Hey, Rocky, what's with the eye?
Good fighting.
Hope you've won it at least.
Oh, yeah, I did real good. Should have
The
seen me.
heavyweight champion of the world, Apollo Creed, at Kennedy Airport
Hey,
in
Rock.
New York.
Who'd you fight?
Spider Rico. Hey.
Is he still around?
Yeah, he's doing real good. He's doing better than you are, that's for sure. Hey, Paulie, what are you laughing for? Yo, Paulie.
I'd like to kill the freak of moron who broke the mirror.
Hey, yo, Paulie. Every day, every night, I pass by your sister's giving me the shoulder. You know what I mean?
Forget
What do you mean,
but
forget?
do better than her.
Don't forget nothing. Every night I pass by the place, I tell a joke. Every morning I pass by the place, I tell a joke. Nothing. She just looks at me. You know what I mean?
Looks, huh?
Yeah, like I'm a plate of leftovers. What? I need a Cadillac to connect with your sister. Something wrong with my face. You know what I mean?
She's a freak of loser.
Hey,
Sometimes she gets me so crazy, I could split her head with a razor.
don't get mental, man. You know.
Well, you caught me in a bad mood.
You're always in a bad mood.
Adrian ain't sharp. Adrian is a loser.
We start to see here that Adrian is living in an abusive household, even though Rocky just shrugs off Polly's rantings. Polly ends up inviting Rocky over the next day for Thanksgiving dinner and to date his sister. Here we begin to see the gender roles in Rocky's world. Rocky feels entitled to Adrian's attention because he gives her attention. Polly feels entitled to invite him over to the house that he shares with Adrian without asking her first, and to basically offer up to his friend her companionship, despite the fact that she's shown no sign of wanting that. Before he leaves, Rocky sits at the bar and watches as Apollo Creed, the heavyweight champion, comes on the television.
With Mackley Green here in Philadelphia at the Fabulous Spectrum. Harry?
You're speaking now of your much-publicized bicentennial fight.
That's right. This is going to be the greatest sporting event in the country's history. A gala occurrence with me beating Green like he committed a crime.
Would you take a
Still to
look
be
at
held in
that
Philadelphia?
guy?
The heavyweight championship
where
of the
the real
world
fight is
going
gonna
to
come
be
from,
held in
the
place it can
pros.
be
Well, we
held
got
in
today
Philadelphia
and jig
with an
clowns.
appraisal on January 1st, the first major event in the country's
Wow.
history.
That's right, clown.
And in keeping with great events throughout the country's history, Apollo Creed will duplicate the cracking of the Liberty Bell by cracking Mackley Green.
Okay,
You calling
Jim.
Apollo Creed a clown?
Do you have any
What
quick
else?
advice
Look
for
at
young boxing hopefuls?
Stay in school and use your brain. Be a doctor, be a lawyer, carry a leather briefcase. Forget about sports as a profession. Sports make you grunt and smell. See, be a thinker, not a stinker.
Okay, thanks a lot, champ.
Yeah,
Jerry
you
Simpson.
craziest man is champion in the world. He took his best shot and become champ. Huh? What shot did you ever take?
Well, I guess
Hey,
the
Rocky,
ceremony
you're not
will
happy
begin.
with your life. It's nice. Me, I got a business going here. I don't have to take no shots.
No one having gone more than 12
That's right.
rounds with him, and that was Jake Dale
Stick
last
that
June
up
in
your
Paris.
business.
You're so insulted about it. Want me to take a shot? All right. I'll take a shot.
So before going on with more critique, I will point out the next thing that I like about Rocky. And that is that all of the characters are not what you would expect from this type of film. Rocky, the hero, is one, not very bright, and that's not something that you see a lot. Also, despite the movie's attempts to show how sweet he is on the inside, on the outside, he is a thug who makes his living with violence. Creed, who is the antagonist in the movie. He's an opportunist, he's egotistical, but he's not the kind of mean-spirited bully that we're used to seeing in this kind of movie. I'll talk more about him later, and let's just say I don't think that the movie is crafting his character out of some high-minded or pure motives, but regardless, it's a unique take. The love interest is a woman with some sort of apparent anxiety disorder from years of abuse, such that some characters use slurs like retard to describe her. My apologies. In spite of the fact that she's actually intelligent and well-read. It may be that Stallone's disability, a nerve injury that occurred during his birth, which paralyzed part of his face and is responsible for that slurred delivery of his speech, it may be that that gave him a sort of empathy for people who are judged in ableist ways. But whatever the case, the choices made here add up to a movie that doesn't just go by the rote, fill-in-the-blank norms that you would expect. And that's a big part of what makes it feel more real and honest to people. So I appreciate that. On his way home, Rocky passes some street kids, and here we're in luck. Usually we don't have the protagonist actually explaining the gender roles in any given movie world, but here Rocky's about to just lay them all out for us.
Hey, Murray, did your brother know you're hanging out so late?
You get lost.
Hey, hey, these guys teach you to talk like that?
Stop it, man.
Hey, don't you never say that to me. Come here.
You stick up the neighborhood.
Hey, you know, when I was your age, there was only one girl in the whole neighborhood that talked like that. You know what I mean? That was it, just one. What are you doing? Well, I'll make your teeth yellow. Don't do that.
I'd like yelling teeth.
I'll make your breath like garbage.
Maybe I'd like
Come on, nobody likes garbage. Anyway, this girl with the dirty mouth, she wasn't bad looking, but you see, none of the guys ever took her serious, you see? They never took her out for any serious date.
Why?
Because that's the way guys are. They laugh when you talk dirty, they think you're cute. But after a while, you get a reputation, that's it. You get no respect, you understand? You get no respect. I gotta use a bad word. Whore. You understand? Whore. See, you use dirty words and maybe you end up becoming a whore, you understand? Hey, that don't matter that you're 12. It don't matter. You don't really have to be one. You just act like one and that's it. Boom. Hey, you get a bad rep, you understand? 20 years from now, people are going to say, hey, you remember Marie? No, who's she? She's a little whore that hung down the atomic hoagie shop. Oh, yeah, now I remember her. You see, they don't remember you, they remember the rep. You understand? Hey, you got a boyfriend? No, you ain't got a boyfriend. You know why? Why don't you think you have a boyfriend? Because you're hanging out with them coconuts in the corner, you understand? You hang out with them coconuts, you get nowhere. They're lemons. You hang out with nice people, you get nice friends, you understand? You hang out with smart people, you get smart friends. You hang out with yo-yo people, you get yo-yo friends. You see, simple mathematics. Hey, I hope you ain't gonna, what was I gonna say?
You hope I don't keep acting like a whore. I'll turn into one, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Night, Rocky.
Hey, Marie, take care, you know?
Hey, Rocky.
Yo.
Screw you, creepo.
So there you have it. Double standards are definitely in play. There are rules. Those rules aren't fair, but they are socially policed, and in fact, Rocky is fully complicit in that. He's not there to tell Marie to stand up and be herself. He's there to tell her to go along with the program. He returns her to her brother, apologizes for using language that one shouldn't use in front of a lady, even though Marie herself seems plenty comfortable with ribald language. The question of what she wants is not even one that gets raised. Neither is the double standard that he's worried about her, but he's not worried about any of the young guys who are there. Nor is anybody concerned that women have totally different rules that they have to play by in this culture. So let's talk a little bit about Marx here. Well, I don't think we've mentioned him yet. Now, for the most part, Carl's work was kind of, gender blind, not in a good way. Now, there are some people who have stated that that's not entirely fair, and that many of his works, especially later on, showed real empathy for what women go through. And I'm going to put a couple of paragraphs from one such paper by Heather Brown that I will also link so that you can read the whole thing if you want. Just for a second, you can pause it and read it if you're interested. But seeing as there isn't all that much to work with here in terms of Karl Marx's writings, I thought it might be of interest to look at a different Marx. His daughter Eleanor. Now, there is a lot of stuff that's in her writings about gender or sexuality that is based on Victorian norms and is not very enlightened. And I'm not here to sit there and make excuses for her, but there's also some stuff in there that's genuinely interesting and insightful. From her essay written with Edward Aveling on the woman question, the truth, not fully recognized even by those anxious to do good to woman, is that she, like the labor classes, is in an oppressed condition, that her position, like theirs, is one of merciless degradation. Women are the creatures of an organized tyranny of men, as the workers are the creatures of an organized tyranny of idlers. Even where this much is grasped, we must never be weary of insisting on the non-understanding that for women, as for the labor classes, no solution of the difficulties and problems that present themselves is really possible in the present condition of society. All that is done, heralded with no matter what flourish of trumpets, is palliative, not remedial. Both the oppressed classes, women and the immediate producers, must understand that their emancipation will come from themselves. Women will find allies in the better sort of men, as the laborers are finding allies among the philosophers, artists, and poets. But the one has nothing to hope from man as a whole, and the other has nothing to hope from the middle class as a whole. The truth of this comes out in the fact that before we pass to the consideration of the condition of women, we have to speak this word of warning. To many, that which we will have to say of the now will seem exaggerated, much that we have to say of the hereafter visionary, and perhaps all that is said, dangerous. To cultured people, public opinion is still that of man alone, and the customary is the moral. The majority still lays stress upon the occasional sex helplessness of woman as a bar to her even consideration with man. It still descants upon the natural calling of the female. As to the former, people forget that sex helplessness at certain times is largely exaggerated by the unhealthy condition of our modern lives, if indeed it is not wholly due to this. Given rational conditions, it would largely, if not completely, disappear. These are not natural laws in the same sense as the laws of motion. They are only certain temporary conventions of society, like the convention that French is the language of diplomacy. Unfortunately for the Adrians of the world then as now, we still have a long way to go. French is not the language of diplomacy anymore, but otherwise a lot of this could have been written in 1974 or 2014 or yesterday, and it would still ring true. Well, we will continue to see throughout the movie the sort of oppressive conditions that Adrian has been dealing with, but for now, let's switch to talking about Apollo Creed, whom we're about to meet in person.
Are the doctor's reports confirmed?
Definitely. Says here Mackley Green has suffered a severely cracked third metacarpal in his left hand. Of course, we can cancel the fight indefinitely if you're set on fighting Green.
Hey, it ain't just Green. Now, what about all the time Apollo has invested?
I believe we can find a solution.
Solution, nothing. Now, you better find me another ranked contender, and I mean in the flash, Jurgens.
Don't play games with my client. Apollo's already done $1 million worth of publicity, has made contractual obligations with 20 different organizations. He's not going to be embarrassed.
I contacted Ernie Roman's manager. Ernie's fighting in France that same week.
And get me Buddy Shaw. Hell, he's ranked 5th.
Went to California and gained 50 pounds. I get hold of every worthwhile contender, and they all say the same thing. 5 weeks just isn't enough time to get into shape.
Oh, shape nothing, man. They're afraid.
Hell, they know everybody in the world's gonna see this fight, and none of them got a prayer whipping me. So they're making excuses so they don't have to be the chump to get whipped in front of the whole civilized world.
All I can say is I'm a good promoter. I've promoted fights in every goddamn country in the world, and I've broken my ass over this one. But I don't know what the hell else to do.
I do. Without a ranked contender, what this fight is gonna need is a novelty. This is the land of opportunity, right? So Apollo Creed on January 1st gives a local underdog fighter an opportunity. A Snow White underdog, and I'm gonna put his face on this poster with me. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm sentimental. And a lot of other people in this country are just as sentimental, and there's nothing they'd like better than to see Apollo Creed give a local Philadelphia boy a shot at the greatest title in the world on this country's biggest birthday. Now, that's the way I see it. And that's the way it's gonna be.
Apollo, I like it. It's very American.
No, Juergens. It's very smart.
Now, when most people see this movie, they'll generally say that race doesn't play a big role in it, and to some extent, that's true. The makers of this movie go out of their way to make it as colorblind as possible. They left out some scenes from the original script that have Rocky giving Dipper his comeuppance. You know, the black guy that took his locker. That's taken out, and I think it's a good thing. And other minor changes along that line. And really, the movie is just firm about the idea that as far as race goes, there is nothing to see here. Move it along, people. But in context of the real world people and events that inspired this movie, this ends up not being colorblindness at all. It's just out and out whitewashing. Let me explain. The story of boxing in America is the story of racism in America. Boxing here started on slave plantations, where plantation owners would force their slaves, wearing iron collars, to fight each other brutally, sometimes close to the death, while they would put money down on who would win. As a side note, if anyone ever tells you that slavery wasn't that bad, or that there were upsides or anything shitty like that, you should just know that you're dealing with a fucking asshole, and just keep that in mind. Now, modern boxing was, at first anyway, all about white guys who refused to fight black guys in the ring. And that was that. One of these champions, Jim Jeffries, said he would retire when there were no more white men left to fight, and he did retire. But he ended up coming back when Jack Johnson got the title. And he stated that this was for the sole purpose of proving that a white man is better than a Negro. And when Jeffries got into the ring with him, it was to chants of "kill the N-word," and a band was playing with, again, apologies, the song "All Coons Look Alike to Me," which was a song then that people played. God. Well, Jack Johnson got in the ring and beat the shit out of him. He didn't just beat him. He humiliated him. He openly mocked him. And this did not go over well. There were riots in multiple cities. At least 5 black men lost their lives that night for cheering Johnson on. And he himself was not one to bow down. He remained defiant, even though that meant all kinds of problems, and he eventually had to leave the country. So after that, it went back to white guys fighting other white guys for like 20-something years, and there were essentially 2 different leagues, a black league and a white league. This finally changed with Joe Louis in 1937, and he held the title until 1948. Now, Joe was no Jack Johnson. He played by rules. He was polite, not offensive. He lived and he fought clean. And this became the way of things for quite a while. There were these black champions, like Joe, like Floyd Patterson, who was like the Fred Rogers of boxing. He really was. And they would hold the title, but they would not upset the apple cart in any way. And they would fight almost entirely white people. Everybody was always looking for the great white hope that was going to take the championship back, and people felt like two black people in the ring fighting each other, even if they were both great, isn't something that anybody would want to watch. But listen, boxing in this era, it wasn't something that you would want to get into if you had better options, right? Not only was it a high-risk thing where you were going to get your brains pounded about for a fairly short-lived period of success at best, but you also had to deal with the fact that it was corrupt as all hell with the mob controlling everything, and it was a nasty kind of game to be in. But for black people who lived down south particularly, they might have been sharecroppers or just people with no way of getting a better life for themselves, for their families, especially these young men, many of whom didn't even have access to education. There weren't a lot of choices. So that's why you had this pool of talent to draw from this group. Anyway, and then comes along Muhammad Ali, originally Cassius Clay from Kentucky, born and raised during the Jim Crow era. And Ali is a brilliant fighter, a brilliant promoter, an entertainer, and he's a radical. After his championship fight with Sonny Liston, he gets asked, since he's been hanging out with Malcolm X, if he's a card-carrying member of the Black Muslims. And he says, among other things, I know where I'm going, and I know the truth. And I don't have to be what you want me to be. I am free to be what I want. Not long after that is when he changes his name from Clay to Ali, saying Clay was his slave name. And when he gets drafted to go to the Vietnam War, he refuses to go. Why should they ask me to put on a uniform and go 10,000 miles from home and drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam, while so-called Negro people in Louisville are treated like dogs? If I thought going to war would bring freedom and equality to 22 million of my people, they wouldn't have to draft me. I'd join tomorrow, but I either have to obey the laws of the land or the laws of Allah. I have nothing to lose by standing up and following my beliefs. We've been in jail for 400 years. Well, they take his title and his boxing license, sentence him to 5 years in prison. It goes through the courts, and eventually the Supreme Court sides with him, but by then he's lost years of his professional life and who knows how much money. He still comes back, and after a period of settling back in, he goes back to being the greatest. Now, Stallone based his character Apollo Creed on Muhammad Ali. And even more than that, the major inspiration for a lot of the movie and even specific scenes that happen in the movie was the fight between Ali and Chuck Wepner. A fight that was literally billed as give the white guy a break. Wepner didn't win, but he lasted 15 rounds with the champ and even managed to knock him down by tripping him, but let's ignore that, I guess. And Stallone was just so inspired that he had to write about that. And fair enough. But if you imagine today someone writing a movie that is clearly and specifically based around Colin Kaepernick, right? Let's call him Corey Kipperick. And in this movie, Corey loves the national anthem, and he's not in any way political, and he doesn't criticize anybody, and he's like running around just singing and saluting the flag and rah, rah, rah. You can kind of see what the problem would be here. Apollo Creed is less Muhammad Ali than he is Cassius Clay, but to be honest, he's even a pretty whitewashed version of Clay. It's reimagining Ali with all the parts that might make white people uncomfortable taken out, and all the parts that they like, you know, the suave good looks and the verbal patter, those all get kept in. There's no Nation of Islam, no Malcolm X, no refusing the draft or criticizing the United States or race relationships in any way. Just the opposite. This guy loves himself some America. He loves capitalism. He is going right along with the program and happy to be there. So anyone who wondered what I meant in the first video when I called it white male capitalist wish fulfillment, well, here you are. And on that note, let me bring in my guest, Garrett, who has a few things to say on the topic of capitalist fairy tales.
Hey there, I'm Garrett, and I've managed to secure myself a guest spot in this video. I'm going to be talking a bit about how capitalism is represented in Rocky, and then I'll introduce the next segment of the video about the relationship between sport, nationalism, and politics. Oh, and for the American viewers, in my country we don't say sports, we just say sport, for both the singular and plural. Just thought I'd mention that to avoid any confusion. Please note that I am not a Marxist. I don't consider myself anti-Marx. There's a lot of stuff I like about Marx's ideas. But I just identify more with some other folks.
Your friends saying that I'm trouble. I can't lie, I was raised in the struggle. And when it all goes off, I'll be there in the double right now. All I want to do is bubble.
So, Sylvester Stallone is not really the status quo challenging type. As a screenwriter and filmmaker, his work is more of a celebration of various norms in our society, perhaps most notably with his glorification of the military and reinforcement of the same kinds of nationalistic myth towards militarism that the state promotes. And while that became the point of the Rambo films from First Blood Part 2 onwards, his other contemporaneous franchise, the Rocky series, also sought to support aspects of the status quo like nationalism and capitalism.
I can't hear you. What?
I want to learn to fight.
Yo, could you turn your robot down?
But it didn't start out that way, really. The first Rocky film is not really a celebration of capitalism or nationalism, at least not in a gratuitous way. However, it does buy into some foundational myths of any society based on capitalism and nationalism. Things like so-called meritocracy, pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps, the idea that the best way for an underprivileged person to improve their lot is to do so using the same systems that are exploiting them. The film works hard, especially in the first act, to establish itself some working-class bona fides. Rocky is a working-class guy who is down on his luck, who wants to get out of his fairly impoverished circumstances. He is working two jobs, one as a professional boxer whose career is really not going well, and one as hired muscle for a local mobster. Here we see Rocky involved in two types of parasitic exploitative social mechanism. One is not socially acceptable and is part of the underworld, but the other is socially acceptable and is part of mainstream, if somewhat niche, society. The guy who pays Rocky for his fight against Spider Rico at the start is keeping the vast majority of the profits of the fight for himself, because our society's system of coercive private hierarchies says that he is the one who deserves it, even though Rocky literally sweats and bleeds for it, and as a boxer is obviously more central to the draw of a boxing match than the guy who pays the rental fee for the venue and prints the posters. He represents the capitalist, capitalism being a system of economic exploitation at the national level. Rocky's other boss, the mobster, represents organized crime, a system of economic exploitation at the community level. The film correctly identifies both as bad, despite the differing legal status of the activities. It also identifies the problem of coercive hierarchy.
You put my stuff on Skid Row. I've been in that locker for 6 years and you put my stuff in a bag on Skid Row?
Mickey tells me what to do, I gotta do it, right, Rock?
And it identifies that Rocky is a victim of the lawful system, and both a victim and an agent of the unlawful one. Though it does of course depict Rocky as disliking the violent aspects of organized crime and wishing to conduct his loan shark collector's job without being violent. You want the audience to be on his side after all.
Did I give you a job this morning or I didn't?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
So why don't you break his thumb like I told you to? When you don't do what I tell you to do, you make me look bad, Rock.
I figure if I break the guy's thumb, he gets laid off, right? He can't make...
Yeah, well, don't
money,
figure it.
can't
Let me
pay
do the
off.
figuring, okay, Rock?
But while the film does identify that the lawful system of bosses exploiting workers is coercive, unjustifiably hierarchical, and exploitative, It then goes on to depict said socially acceptable parasitic system as also being the means of Rocky's elevation out of poverty. The film has Rocky realize that the reason he is at the bottom of a coercive hierarchy and not thriving in the boxing world is not because the system is wrong and at fault, but because he isn't dedicating enough time and energy to being a boxer. He's not taking it seriously enough, and is dividing his attentions by also working for the mobster. All he needs to do is take personal responsibility for his boxing career and pull himself up by his bootstraps by training really hard, and then capitalism will reward him greatly rather than exploiting him. Even though he loses the fight against Apollo Creed, his profile as a boxer will be increased massively, and thus assumedly his career will be going much better. Thus the film buys into one of the core myths of capitalism, that if you're poor and at the bottom of a shitty system, really that's on you. Just work harder and you'll become one of capitalism's winners. Yeah, the people at the bottom are being exploited, but it's their own fault, really. They're just lazy. Put yourself out there and go do some push-ups, you lazy bums. But the film also has themes that go against this message and unintentionally undermine it. I see this happening a lot. A piece of entertainment media like a movie or a show that is not setting out to be a critique of the status quo, but ends up being one anyway if you think about it. I call this phenomenon being accidentally anti-capitalist, and Rocky is a really good example of it, I think. As a profession, boxing is such a potent metaphor for the evils of capitalism. Rocky is literally bleeding for a paycheck, which reminds me of this, an even more straightforward personification of the same thing: workers selling blood to make rent. This is actually happening in the US. Anyway, back to Rocky. He is sustaining head injuries and opening himself up to a fairly high likelihood of some amount of brain damage. You might say, but Garrett, he wants to be a boxer. It's his dream. He's not a slave to capitalism. He's a man trying to fulfill his dreams. And you're right about the first part. It is his dream to be a successful boxer. But as I mentioned before, at the start of the film, he is not proactively pursuing that dream. Yet he's still seeking as many fights as he can get.
Balboa, you get winner share, $65, less $15 locker and corner man, $5 shower and towel, and 7% tax. Comes to $40.55.
When do I fight again?
Maybe 2 weeks. Give me a call. The doctor should be in about 20 minutes.
The film tells us that at least part of the reason for that is that he needs money. In this scene, Rocky makes a joke while talking to his fish.
You know, if you guys could sing or dance, I wouldn't be doing this, you know.
Like I said, he's clearly joking around, but there's also some truth to what he's saying here, I think. If he didn't have to pay his bills, he probably wouldn't be seeking to do as many of these low-profile, non-career advancing fights as he is. Certainly not before he starts taking training more seriously. He needs the money. He's getting the tar beaten out of him on a regular basis in a way that will not help him fulfill his dreams or improve his bad financial situation, and it's all out of necessity. He's working 2 jobs because neither is earning him an adequate living. And when he does decide to try and take a more active role in improving his circumstances, in order to do so while fulfilling his dreams, the only choice he has is to do so via the same system that is screwing him over. Capitalism has backed him into a corner. Think about it. He has 3 choices. 1, he can starve. 2, he can become fully absorbed into organized crime and spend his life doing something he knows is unethical and hurts his community. 3, he can pursue his dreams, but only by fully submitting to a system he knows is exploiting him and the overwhelming majority of his colleagues. For many people, these 3 options are real, which is why fiction explores this so much. Season 4 of The Wire, for example, is all about this. The kids' only route out of poverty and despair are to prey on their community or to submit to a system that has been marginalizing and brutalizing them for their entire lives. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Rocky's depiction of capitalism. Now I'm going to be talking about something broader, but nevertheless of deep importance to the Rocky franchise. That being... Hey, wait a minute. You said you don't say sports. What gives? Yeah, but I also said I was doing merely the introduction to this segment. Chrissy will be covering most of it herself, so I went with the American terminology, but only for the title card. One thing I need to make real clear is that I am not trying to demonize sport by what I say here. I like a bunch of different sports. I'm also not trying to make fans of the specific sports I bring up feel in any way bad for enjoying them. Hey, now wait just a goddamn second here, buddy. You said sports. I heard it. Twice. Yeah, well, when I said we use the word sport for the plural, I meant just for the general large group plural. You know, like for talking about sport as a concept or just in vague terms. If we're talking about, say, a specific group of sports, as I did right there, We add the S. Yeah, I know it's confusing, alright, shut up. Anyway, back to what I was saying. I know British anarchists who love football, American anarchists who love baseball. What I'm about to say should have no bearing on whether or not you or anyone else enjoys football or baseball or whatever. What this is about is being aware of how these kinds of sports are used by certain groups within society. Oh, and by the way, society is kind of like how we use the word sport here grammatically. Talking about societies in general as a concept, you say society, like human society is problematic. But when you're grouping a small number of specific societies together, you know what? I'm going to stop talking about that. So what groups in society am I talking about? Well, there's a whole bunch that use people's love of sport in various nefarious ways. But here I am specifically referring to the state. I need to make it clear that I am not talking about some smoky backroom conspiracy of a particular group of individuals. In fact, the intentions of the state are not relevant. You could make the argument that the state actively wants to distract people away from political activism by pushing pursuits like sports fandom, and thus take up a good chunk of what free time they have away from being a cog in the machine. You could make that argument, but you don't need to, because ultimately their intentions don't matter. What matters is the end result, and that is the situation I just described. They don't have a whole lot of time to undertake the process of becoming well-versed in ideas that would, and have in the past, become a problem for the state and for the capitalists if they got really popular. This is headed off by the fact that these kinds of ideas are not part of the curriculum in our education systems, both public and private. So it's a whole new sociolect, a new lexicon one must learn in order to process and understand this stuff. And that's a serious undertaking. It takes time and effort, time which most folks are forced into spending doing other things.
That's why the propaganda system is so successful. Very few people are going to have the time or the energy or the commitment to carry out the constant battle that's required to get outside of, McNeil Lair or Dan Rather or somebody like that. The easy thing to do, you come home from work, you're tired, you've had a busy day, you're not going to spend the evening carrying out a research project. So you turn on the tube and say, it's probably right. Or you look at the headlines in the paper and then you watch the sports or something. And that's basically the way the system of indoctrination works. Sure, the other stuff is there, but you're going to have to work to find it.
Let's take a look at two quick examples. Person A is a full-time worker. When they get home from a long day's work, they don't want to engage in that kind of radical political activism. They want to watch some shows, listen to some music. They want to relax. Person B is a sufferer of a severe mental disorder and is not able to work. The mental health systems of their society are hot garbage and have never been of much help. Person B spends most of their time coping with their disorder and struggling to interact with the large welfare bureaucracies of the state that they rely on. When not doing either of those two things, they want to watch some shows, listen to some music. They want to relax. And one thing both these people may choose to do to relax is to watch some sport. So why am I talking about this? Because if these kinds of activities are what people are going to be spending their free time on, it makes sense, and indeed is crucial, to look at the effect they have sociologically, the kinds of messages they reinforce and support. In the case of sport, at every level, sport reinforces ideas like the competition-based model of capitalist society. At the local level, they reinforce ideas like tribalism, enthusiastic support of one's high school or university, and dislike of rival high schools and universities, social divisions between cities, towns, and regions.
I remember in high school already, I was pretty old, I suddenly asked myself at one point, why do I care if my high school team wins the football game? I mean, I don't know anybody on the team, I mean, they have nothing to do with me. I mean, why am I cheering for my team? It doesn't make any sense, But the point is, it does make sense. It's a way of building up irrational attitudes of submission to authority and, group cohesion behind, leadership elements. In fact, it's training in irrational jingoism.
At the national level, one of the things they reinforce is, of course, nationalism. National flags and other national symbols like the bald eagle, recitations of the national anthem, the Pledge of Allegiance. All of that is on frequent display. Then you get stuff like this. The US military making deals with the private institutions of popular competitive sport to do flyovers and displays like this.
The roar of a military flyover is the highlight of NFL pregame activities.
And the Padres take the field in their camo uni.
Pre-game, a full field flag was unveiled in honor of our troops.
Pay tribute to those who protect our way of life.
There is Dad, home from Korea. And here's a moment that makes you proud to be an American.
Please direct your attention high above the scoreboard and welcome Sergeant First Class Richard Babineau.
as he rappels down from the arena catwalk for tonight's ceremonial puck drop.
I'm guessing I don't have to explain why this kind of stuff is deeply worrying. And sport also reinforces nationalism on the international level, of course, but that kind of goes without saying, so I'm not going to delve into that. The last thing I want to say about these popular sports like football, baseball, cricket, and in my country, rugby, is that the energy and creative intellectual attentions most dedicated fans display is such an impressive thing, as Chomsky talks about here.
And in fact, it's striking to see the intelligence that's used by ordinary people in sports. I mean, you listen to radio stations where people call in. They have the most exotic information and understanding about, all kind of arcane issues.
I can't help but think what a great resource that kind of social mental capacity could be to the cause of political activism if directed towards that instead. Not because I'm annoyed at people for what they choose to spend their time on. That's not it at all. No, it's a reminder to those seeking to tear down the systems of domination and oppression and forge a better world. It's a reminder that when the time comes, when the situation is so dire and so monstrous that the people have finally had enough and they rise up, we are going to have that great resource. Because an organized people, proactively saying that they aren't going to take it anymore, that they are going to stand up for what is right no matter what, well, that is one of the most awe-inspiring and unstoppable things in this world. So even when the situation seems so massively stacked against us now, the time will come when that is no longer the case. And when it does, well, that same amazing capacity that enables people to so knowledgeably and enthusiastically participate in huge, complex social activities like popular professional sport, well, that energy and will is going to be going towards a different kind of huge, complex, organized social activity. Well, that's my guest segment. Thanks for watching. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Garrett. The next couple of scenes I'm just going to describe briefly. Rocky meets with Gazzo, who has somehow heard about his date with Adrian and gives him a few bucks, while Gazzo's bodyguard throws insults around at him and Adrian. Next, we see Apollo Creed looking through a book on fighters of the area, and he happens to see his name and like it. Italian Stallion. So based solely on this criteria, this is who he picks. Now let's go on to Rocky's date with Adrian. He meets Polly, who assures him that Adrian knows he's coming and is just thrilled about the whole thing. But when he gets there, things don't really start out very well.
You're late.
Go to the hospital? Goes to the hospital. 10 minutes late.
Yo, how you doing?
I told you she's very excited.
Paulie, why didn't you tell me you were bringing him here? You look at me, I'm not ready for this.
It would make a difference if you were. Look, he's a friend, and now he's taking you out.
No, I can't.
Well, you're in the kitchen, and I want you out right now.
I won't.
Hey! Hey! Hey, I want you out of here systematically. I'm sick of seeing you hanging around like a freaking spider. Go out and live. Enjoy life.
Boy, I can't go.
Don't get wise with me now, huh? I'm tired of you being a loser.
Don't call me that, Paulie.
Apollo Creed says he'll be shopping for another victim to fill Green's vacancy for the bicentennial championship fight. To be held.
Tell me you were bringing him home.
How do you know I did?
By the way, rumor has it that this will be the most widely.
Go!
Why?
Paulie, it's Thanksgiving. I got a turkey in the oven.
Oh, a turkey in the oven. Oh. You want the bird? Go in the alley and eat the bird.
Oh.
I want you out of here. Get out of the house. Go out and enjoy your freaking life. You hungry, Rock?
Hey, yo, Paul, listen, maybe we just better forget all this, you know? Just forget it.
Forget nothing. Go ahead, tell her something funny.
Ain't nothing to talk about. She's in a bad mood. I'm in a bad mood.
You know how to do funny things. You want to go out with my sister?
Yeah.
Oh?
I don't know what to say.
Morning.
Yo, Adrian, it's me, Rocky. Rocky, you know? Listen, I don't know what to say, 'cause I ain't never talked to no door before, you know? I mean, what do I say to a door? Hey, listen,
You're doing fine.
I ain't doing fine. Look like an idiot.
Keep doing what you're doing. Funny, I know all about these things.
I feel like a jerk. So, Adrian, you know, it's Rocky again, you know? Listen, I know you ain't too happy at this moment, you know? Well, could you do me a favor, you know? I ain't got nobody to spend Thanksgiving with, you know? So, how about maybe you and I, maybe we'll go out together, get something to eat. I don't know, maybe laugh a little bit, who knows, you know? Would you like to, I don't know, would you like to maybe, you know, you and me go out together? What do you think? Would you like to? We're gonna have a good time. We'll have a real good time, you know? Thanks for the bird.
I'm gonna turn the TV off. I gotta hit it.
The character that remains to us the most mysterious through this entire movie is Adrian. And it's not just that she's quiet. I mean, entire movies can be written about quiet people that you get to know in a very deep way. It's more that we never really see her outside of her relationship with men. Is it just me? I would love to see a retelling of Rocky with Adrian as the point of view character. Just even basic things like, what happens in her room by herself? How does she come to decide to go out with him and get herself dressed and ready? You know, what's going on there? But we never get to see that with her. The next scene is the famous ice skating scene, and it works. The two of them, they're skating around, they're sort of holding each other up and talking, and it's sweet, it's understated, and romantic. Then we get to the apartment scene. I have made 2 videos about rape culture in movies. I'll link them. And I was just going to say here, all right, just go watch that. I don't want to go through it again. I don't want to talk about it again. But then, as I was making the videos, it came to light that Stallone is being investigated for sexually assaulting someone. And so it started to feel like a cop-out to not at least address it. So, okay, let's do it again. First of all, I have no real knowledge about the accusations against Stallone, other than that they exist, so I can't really talk to them. But what I can comment on, and let's put it this way, if we had a magic wand that we could wave it in the air, and the next day, everybody who had sexually harassed, assaulted, coerced someone into having sex with them in Hollywood would all just wake up and they would have tails, well, then you would have a lot of people with tails in Hollywood the next day. A lot. And that's for the same reason that if you're a politician in a corrupt state, it's likely that you will do at some point at least something that's kind of corrupt. Because it's about what you can get away with. It's about what the culture is like. It's about what's normalized, and who's going to be put ahead is the people that can go along with the culture. So that's why Me Too and Time's Up are so important. They're trying to change those rules. They're trying to change that culture into one where it's not normal to sexually harass or coerce or use your power to manipulate people into having sex with you when they don't want to. That's it. So Rocky cajoles Adrian up to his apartment, and once there, ignores her very strong signals that she doesn't want to be there. She's not just uncomfortable, she's afraid. She's never been in a man's apartment before, and she doesn't want to be there now. So eventually she tries to leave, and Rocky physically blocks her from doing so. I mean, he's a boxer, for fuck's sake. She works in a pet store. But of course, in 70s movie logic, written by, directed by men, he's going to overcome her resistance. And she's going to go from pissing her pants terrified to overcome with passion and swooning with delight in his arms. And people will just say, oh, hey, she likes it. Come on. You know, and that's the problem. That men write this completely unreal kind of scenario out that ignores how people work, how consent works, how any of this works. And there are other people out there who will believe it, who will buy it. You can look at the comments in my other videos. There are people who go in for this rape myth crap. So, don't block doors, guys. If someone appears to be frightened, unwilling, trying to leave, that's a good time to go, oh, okay, cool, bye. It's the time to stop what you're doing, okay? Well, I feel done now. I wanted to get further, but you know, there is a lot here to talk about. What I will do is make a short video about sports and nationalism that's kind of an addendum to this. And I really hope that you guys watch it because it's important. Many of us lefties are more likely to be Star Wars fans than sports fans, and okay, cool, that's fine. But we need to know how this works, how these things connect, because they definitely connect. It's not some coincidence that Trump is cracking down on football players who don't want to stand for the anthem. Anyway, I want to leave on a more cheerful note. So the next thing that I love about Rocky is the score. Come on, that Bill Conti score just gets your fucking attention. Just wakes you the hell up and you're like, what? It's just perfect for the movie. It's just as true of sort of the quiet moments, the tender moments, as it is of the big rah, rah, rah moments. It just follows the emotional path of the film and matches it note for note. Scores don't get a lot of attention, and when they do, they're often treated as something that is separate from the film. But it's not separate. In its way, the soundtrack operates the way that camera movements operate. They show you where to look, what to feel, what's important here, whether something is serious or frightening or sweet or what. And Conti, in his first but definitely not his last score, he just gets it all right. So, hooray for Bill! I would like to thank my patrons, whom I will list here. Thank you to Mike Yoakum, Faustin Talacha, Jordy, Kabaiza, Christina L. Mogul, Marty Abernathy, Brad Savvy, Daniel Jones, Kevin Thurber, Some Random Geek, Nikki Paprika, Andre Rodriguez, Sarita Gallagher, Joanna Carvalho, Nick Hayden, Jesse Wynn, Marid Deanne, Bruce Bartup, and Joe Taylor. And to anybody who wants to join this listing, and I'm sure you do, and see more videos like the one that I'm making now, that would be really awesome. But if you can't, you know, that's totally cool too. A like, a comment, a subscription, hitting that little bell notification thing, all of those things help a lot too. So regardless, I love you all, I appreciate you all, and bye!